So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Paul Watkins, who is the Director of the Office of Innovation at the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection. In his role, he oversees the Bureau's efforts to facilitate innovation, competition, and consumer access within the markets of financial products and services. Prior to joining the Bureau, Mr. Watkins was the Civil Litigation Division Chief in the Arizona Office of the Attorney General, where he managed the state's litigation in areas such as consumer fraud, antitrust, and civil rights. In Arizona, he drafted and advocated for the legislation establishing the first fintech sandbox in the country. Mr. Watkins came from private practice at Covington and Burling and Simpson Thacher. He's a graduate of Hillsdale College and Harvard Law School and was a former clerk of Judge Dennis Shedd in the United States Court of Appeals. Mr. Watkins.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. I have to apologize because I'm sure you'll hear from a lot of good speakers today, and when I'm in your shoes, I sort of judge the speech by whether the speaker tries to engage me with a joke. And we regulators don't tell jokes, so I have to try to engage you with a disclaimer, which is that these are my views. They might not be legal advice. They might not be the views of anybody else. I want to talk to you about three things today. I want to talk about why I, as a consumer protection regulator, care about innovation. More importantly, why a bureau tasked with consumer protection cares about innovation, and then talk about some of the tangible steps that we're taking to promote innovation. So as was mentioned during the intro, I was previously Civil Division Chief in the Arizona Attorney General's office. The plurality of that work was consumer protection. And consumer protection regulators interact with innovation, but it's usually in a negative context. So if you were to say innovation to me, I would think of Volkswagen Auto Group's efforts to combine high performance, fuel economy, and low emissions under a banner that they called Truth in Engineering. I might also think of Theranos and their slogan, "One drop changes everything." Which maybe in retrospect did not change so much. These are primarily how consumer protection regulators relate to innovation, and I think it's understandable that a lot of regulators are skeptical of this concept. They are skeptical of a lot of the claims, a lot of the marketing that comes out in this space. But as we were engaging in consumer protection efforts, as we were engaging in these enforcement actions, we had to shift our perspective on consumer protection. We had to make what I think is an important shift. We had to stop looking at consumer protection solely through the eyes of the regulator and shift so that we were looking at consumer protection through the eyes of the consumer. And once you start looking at consumer protection through the eyes of the consumer, I think it opens up a number of different avenues of core consumer protection that are broader than enforcement. From a consumer perspective, only a small percentage of the transactions that they touch are redressable by a regulator, are something that they are going to receive restitution from. From the consumer's perspective, the main protection that they are exercising every day is the ability to walk away, the ability to choose a different product, the ability to choose something that fits with their needs. And so as a regulator, you have to care about innovation. You have to care because it drives competition, which produces consumer access. And so as we started looking at what regulators around the country were, or not just around the country, but around the world, the actions that they were taking, we noticed a strong focus on promoting innovation. That regulators around the world were creating these things called sandboxes, which essentially is a way to increase innovation in a highly regulated space by reducing the barriers to entry so that new products can come to market. And this was a common theme. You know, it's in the UK, it's in Abu Dhabi, it's in Hong Kong, it's in Taiwan. In fact, all of these regulators, it seemed, if there was one thing that they were all doing It was promoting innovation through some sort of change, some sort of sandbox, some sort of modification of the regulatory structure. And the implication of that, of course, is that there's something about the current regulatory structure that is not sufficiently facilitating innovation. And that's a problem. That may be a problem for those of you in this room trying to start a business in that space. That's maybe an important concern. As a consumer protection regulator, that's not necessarily our concern. Our concern is that the products that consumers need may not be coming to market, and they may not be coming to market as fast as they should. And this is not some view, some crazy libertarian view imported from some floating island in the Pacific. This view of consumer protection is straight out of Dodd-Frank. And the acting director, as evidenced by the name change through I think every step that he has taken, is committed to implementing Dodd-Frank. And when you look at Dodd-Frank, when you look at Title X, when you look at what is the purpose of the Consumer Protection Bureau, it says it is to promote, it has a lot of purposes. One of the purposes is to promote competition. If you look at the objectives that are listed right after the purpose, those objectives include facilitating innovation, reviewing regulations that may be redundant, that may be unnecessary, promoting consumer access to financial services. These are and always have been core aspects of consumer protection. And the Bureau has acted to promote these things in the past. There are primarily two programs, I think, specifically designed for this area. One is a trial disclosure program, and the second is our no action letter program. The trial disclosure program was instituted in 2013. The idea here, and it's specifically authorized by subsection 1032 of Dodd-Frank, the idea here is that as delivery mechanisms change, our disclosure requirements may not be up to date. Our disclosure requirements, many of them, are designed for a paper form. You can convert paper to a PDF, and that may be sufficient in some cases. I suppose you can then allow people to scale the PDF on a mobile phone. I think it's probably possible that there are better delivery mechanisms than scalable PDFs on a mobile phone, but folks are afraid to try something different because the consequences of getting it wrong are so significant. So it's important for us as a bureau that serves consumers to allow these new ways of communicating with consumers to be used in the market. So what we've done is propose a new policy. We heard a lot of feedback on the prior policy. I think consistent issues that were noted were there was uncertainty as to time. So the proposed policy now says if you completed your policy, once you've submitted a complete policy, we'll give you an answer in 60 days. And then another issue was we don't know how long we can use this disclosure. What if it works? Then what? What's our reward? So the policy says you can test this disclosure, the proposed policy, for 2 years. If everyone agrees that this is successful, that this is working, then you can use the disclosure until we are able to amend our rules and allow for this new type of disclosure. So I think there is a meaningful incentive to submit applications for these sorts of things. Groups can apply under the proposed policy, and you don't have to identify every single member at the time of application. So some trade group could apply, and then when the members are going to test the disclosure, they notify the Bureau, hey, this disclosure that you've already approved, we're going to start using that, and I think this may help overcome some of the, or may benefit from economies of scale. Another thing, another aspect of the program is that adverse action notices are included as a disclosure. So folks that are challenged in how they're going to communicate the results of an AI mechanism can talk to us about what that might look like. So that is one policy. The comment period ends tomorrow. So if you are in the process of drafting your comment, I'd encourage you to go ahead and get those in. We had a short comment period, which did, we received a little bit of, some folks objected to that. So the prior model was 10 months of notice and comment, and then we used the policy for 5 years, during which time we had no applicants, even though the statute says the requirements must be designed to encourage applications. So we're trying to move away from that model, which I don't think any of you use in the private sector when you're rolling out a program or a product. And now we are trying to use a little bit of a shorter time span. We had a 30-day comment period, but this is a policy. We don't necessarily have to go through a notice and comment to change the policy. So if it can be improved, we're free to improve it in the future. You're free to continue to comment. The second policy is no action letter policy, and our supervisory highlights indicated that we are looking to revise this policy. I think the person who introduced me may know as much about this policy as anyone. We've issued one letter to Upstart. Some people think that process took too long to issue that letter. I think it was maybe close to 2 years. And there have also been a number of comments about the policy and suggestions for how its usefulness could be improved. So those are all things that we're actively considering, that we're actively looking at, as has been publicly noted before. So these are the tools that we currently have at our disposal. If I were to summarize the principles that we're basing ourselves off of as we're revising these principles, clarity is a huge key. Clarity of timing, clarity of expectations as to what folks can receive, and coordination is probably the second. As is often commented, we're in a federal system. We have many regulators at the federal level. Jurisdiction is divided in all sorts of ways. It poses a number of challenges that regulators do not have in other jurisdictions. So coordination is absolutely essential. That's why if you look at the trial disclosure program, you will notice that we've proposed accelerated admission for anybody who's an entity in a state sandbox. We've indicated that we intend to cooperate with pro-innovation efforts by other regulators around the world. We've joined what's called the Global Financial Innovation Network, which has its first meeting at the end of October, which is a coordination effort among 11 regulators designed to overcome some of the jurisdictional obstacles to innovation. So with that, again, these are the efforts that we are taking to put consumers in a stronger position. As was noted by the prior speaker, there have been a number of pro-innovation steps in this space. If I think back to when I was growing up in a small town in Oregon and my parents went to the bank and they bought the CD that was offered by that bank, and they had to accept the savings rate that was offered by that bank. And if that bank wasn't open on Saturday, then they couldn't do banking. I don't think that's a protected consumer. I think a circumstance where someone can buy a CD from banks all over the world, where they can go online and switch out their account when they're unhappy with the rate or other terms that they've been given, that is a consumer in a much stronger position. And those are very good incentives to be working on behalf of consumers, not just the incentives to avoid fraud enforcement, but the incentives to be continually updating the product, to continually be providing a better service, or else the business will lose market share. So those twin incentives, avoiding fraud, promoting and improving the consumer experience, I think are rightfully the focus for a consumer protection agency such as ours. So with that, Alison may have some specific questions, and I'm glad to answer questions from her or from any of you. Thank you very much.
Hi. So it's very interesting to hear how the Office of Innovation is really taking the leadership, what the leadership has said around increased transparency and accountability. And I think we've seen that already with the proposed changes to the disclosure rules. And you've already indicated that the no action letter process may be next. Are you able to provide any more details about what what you expect the changes to be at this point?
No, no. I have a general. I have a general instruction whenever I'm supposed to speak in front of a group, which is not to say anything newsworthy. So okay. I'll try to adhere to that again today. Yeah. But I'll just say there's been a lot of comment on this policy, and so we're aware of that. We're aware of the comments that were received previously. The policy itself says that the Bureau will periodically review and revise it. So I think this is a very appropriate thing for us to be doing, and we're doing it on in considering as much data as we have available, and then thinking about how can we provide clarity, how can we coordinate, how can we do the sorts of things that can make this program successful.
Certainly from Upstart's perspective, like some of the proposed changes in the disclosure rules, including streamlining the application process, would be certainly very helpful, I think, for new companies when they try the no action letter. I think the other area where there's a lot of challenges is really providing, for regulatory sandboxes specifically, is really providing a safe space for innovation. And I know that the disclosure rules really took this on head on with it, but it had statutory authority to do that. Absent that statutory authority, I think the Bureau's it has some options are limited. What do you have a unique perspective in that you've been at the state level and now at the federal level. What do you plan to do to try and increase cooperation between the federal agencies and the state agencies with respect to providing a regulatory sandbox that's truly a safe space for companies to operate in?
Well, I think agencies just have to be willing. You can't just selfishly hold on to your jurisdiction. You have to recognize when other actors have the same incentives you do, when they have the same abilities you do, and where there are opportunities to coordinate and be willing to take advantage of those opportunities. So, for example, we don't license. We do not license entities. States license, the OCC in some cases licenses, but we don't. So that puts us in a very different position from the FCA. If we want to have a sort of holistic pro-innovation approach, we have to be able to overcome that hurdle, and the only way that we can do it is through cooperation.
So engaging with regulators was a very important first step for Upstart in its no action letter process. And while it was a long process, there was avenues for us to engage. For companies where they may not have a lot of experience working in Washington, how would you recommend that they engage with your office and the Bureau generally?
My biggest tip on engagement is to have a know specifically what you are asking for, and then back it up with statutory support, statutory or regulatory support. The frustrating part from a regulator is to have these general conversations that don't get down to, here's where we think your jurisdiction is. You're either interpreting it or using it in this way. We think you could also accomplish your purposes as an agency by using it in this way. I rarely hear those arguments, and it's sort of surprising to me. And I don't know if it means that there needs to be more conversations between the business people and the lawyers, or what the problem is. But both at the state and the federal level, I'm continually surprised by the absence of substantive conversations.
I mean, in the past, the Bureau has had office hours, which the benefit of which actually enabled companies to engage with the Bureau, but had some limited benefits, and for some it felt a little bit like a one-way flow of information. Has the Bureau considered any other avenues to provide access, but also maybe a more meaningful feedback loop for companies?
Well, the feedback loop is hard because if we're going to make a statement, it has to go. If we're going to make a meaningful statement, it has to go through an extended process, and that process means that we can't make those statements very often, that they're very slow, and we can't really make them informally in one-off conversations. So there's that inherent tension, and I'm not sure exactly how to overcome that. The Bureau continues to meet with companies. We have a 40-person research department. I have 3 people in the Office of Innovation, which is more than my predecessor, who had, I think, 1 person. So that Office of Research is the primary means for the Bureau to learn about new companies and new businesses, and that is continuing to occur, and we participate in those meetings where it's useful and where it's helpful. But I've had a couple of these conversations, and it gets to the point of, we want some certainty, we want some clarity, but we don't feel like we can use the programs that you have in place. So I think we need to have programs that people want to use, that work for our purposes and for the applicant. And then at that point, it will make sense for us to have more conversations.
So we've talked a little bit about the changes to the disclosure policy and maybe some changes to the no action letter policy. Are there other areas where the Bureau is looking at to make some changes to expand the scope of any regulatory sandbox?
Those are what we've indicated in the supervisory highlights document, and so that's my focus.
So maybe, so you mentioned in your speech that you have looked at international regulatory sandbox programs, and you were obviously instrumental in Arizona's sandbox. What have you learned, both good and bad, from your examination of those programs that you might bring with you to the Bureau?
Well, I guess it's hard for me to crystallize that into a couple sound bites, and maybe I just started from a real low level of knowledge. I feel like I learned a whole lot. One of the encouraging aspects of these programs is that it's been very rare for fraud to occur within a sandbox, which I think speaks well to the regulators, and it also says something about the incentives. I think most fraudsters do not want to enter into a cooperative relationship with a regulator where they're having to open up their books and provide reports, and where they're under greater scrutiny than maybe a regular business would be. So I think regulators so far have done a good job managing these programs, at least based on the information I've seen, and that's encouraging. But there does need to be more of an effort to coordinate between these sandboxes, because everything moves so quickly in this space, and you're really sort of faced with a question of what kind of behavior do you want to reward? Do you want to reward the behavior where people are going through the proper jurisdictional hooks, or do you want to reward the person who just grabbed as much market share as possible and now says, well, sue me. I have this customer base, and they're all going to write letters to the city council if you try to do something to me. And I think we want to encourage folks to go through the proper jurisdictional channels.
So one of the aspects of the upstart process when we applied for no action was, the timing and the streamline, the application process was long. There was a lot of collaboration with the Bureau on a compliance plan, and it was a very thoughtful process. With respect to the sandbox, the proposed changes to disclosure, how do you anticipate the internal process improvements to meet both your timelines, but also maintain some of that collaboration?
Right. So that's a key program that we're working on right now, is to sketch out the requirements of what that looks like. Where are some administrative functions of the timeline that we can compress? Are there areas where we actually want to build in more feedback, more discussion? How can we? A lot of it goes to just having an established process in place that can be repeated, and I think that will solve. Maybe I'm just a hopelessly optimistic, but I think that will solve a lot of the issues.
Certainly from my perspective, I think the unknown was one of the, we weren't quite sure whether all the effort was going to be worth it in the end, although it did turn out to be, but having a defined process will certainly help. So I think we're out of time at this point, but I wanted to take this moment to thank you for your comments.
Well, thank you. Thanks very much.